All right. Kathy, do you need to call the meeting to order at all, or?
Mr. Russo will
Okay.
do that for you. Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, all. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. Mr. Sprang, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. You should have the report. I'm sorry we didn't send it out Friday. You should have gotten it yesterday. I hope everyone got it. I'm going to just point to a couple of the, I think, the important statistics in it. And what I'd like to do is look at the school budget in terms of the number of school months that are gone, because most of our expenses really go over 10 months of the year, not 12. And what I point out there is this report's through the end of October. And so 2 of our 10 months are completed with this information. And what you can see is we've spent $28.6 million of our 139.6 operating budget, and that's 20.4% of the total. So it's pretty much lined up with where we might have expected to be at this point. But a couple of things are starting to show up, and the first one is prices. And we've all heard, you just have to turn on the news to see what's going on with general economic conditions. We've only really seen some isolated sharp increases on different things, nothing that would represent right now calling an alarm, but it's something that's going on, and we're not immune to it. So we'll have to stay alert. But in there, one of the concerns I've been developing has to do with oil prices. As you know, most people didn't think they'd stay high for this long, and they are high. We've just started the heating season, and so we're going to be watching this very closely. If you could, in your reports, if you look to I'm going to ask you to point to the 4th page, and I'll start numbering them. It's the line item, individual line items that make up our budget, and the page that starts with transportation special ed. When you go down that page, you'll see the line item for fuel for buildings. That's our heating oil line. We've budgeted $273,000 there, and coincidentally, after I prepared this report, we have a electronic approval process for purchases, and I was asked to approve a purchase order encumbrance for the entire year for our heating oil, and it was up close to $310,000. As you can see, our budget is $273,000. So we're going to be a little over on that one. I didn't think it was that large that we needed to take any action tonight or in the very near future. But it's based on, that overage is based on the heating season we had in 2018-19 in terms of the number of gallons we use. That's, of course, the last time we were open for 10 months. But so much depends on the weather and how cold it is. So it's just not, you just can't say right now, but I'd say it's on our radar. And we'll have more to say on that as the winter goes on. So that's, so prices are starting to creep into our budget with both of those things. The second part of the report, last month you asked about health insurance. And I think it was because when we looked at the end of the year last year, we returned to the city $2.8 million. And if I recall, most of that, a couple million came from health insurance. And as we talked, it was really because when the hospitals, I'll use the word, were overrun with COVID patients for 4 or 5 months of the year, people put off going for different surgeries. It might have been elective or deferred, and there's been a lot written about that. But that's why we turned back money last year. So you would ask me, how are things going this year so far? And we did ask our consultant, A.M. Gallagher, to look at the claims. They're much more expert than I would be. And so what you'll see in the report, I think it's the, let me just turn to it. It's towards the back, there's a long sheet. It says Danbury Public Schools. I can't share the screen, but what it is, Gallagher put this together, and they went back to July of 2018 and month by month showed our claims. As you know, we self-insure for health insurance, which means we pay the actual claims that come in, plus something to Cigna to operate those claims as a Cigna plan, but it's self-insured. And you can see they broke it down, the total number of employees that had health insurance, and then what the different claims were: medical, RX's, prescription, dental, and vision, with a total. So you can look down, what I did was I looked at the 3 comparable months. I looked at July, August, and September of 2018, and July, August, September of 2019. Those were normal months, and compared that. If you look at the bottom of the report, there's the 3 most recent months there. And I spoke at length with Gallagher and said, how do you interpret this? And what I got was an email from them, and that's also part of your report. You'll see from Steve Scholl is our consultant, dated November 4th. And I won't go through all of it, but the main point he said was that our claims were running about 1.9 million a month. He thought that was as expected, kind of his words. But at the very bottom of his email, he says to us, don't put my words, don't go spending the money yet, because they expect there to be an uptick in elective surgeries and deferred procedures that people have still been putting off. They expect that to happen, and that would raise our claims. And his words, time is the only way to see this impact maybe to us. I pressed him a little bit on, if he's telling us what the industry experts say, what is the consensus of when this might start? And they just don't have a time that they're saying, but they think it will be during this plan year. So another thing, I think we should watch each month, and hopefully our next meeting I'll have some more information on that.
So John, can I ask a question?
Oh, of course. Yep.
Okay, so with the uptick of oil prices and the uptick of anticipated elective procedures coming our way, are you going to put a moratorium on spending right now?
Well, I haven't talked about that with the superintendent. I think it's time to consider what choices we have. There may be other choices in there. One of the things that happens, though, in a public school budget is a lot of the spending is front-loaded, meaning teachers want their things before school starts. The books are for all year long and materials.
Of course.
So when you do put a freeze on, it generally tends to affect the spring activities a little unevenly. For example, the fall sports are all done. So if you were to cut back there, it would hit your spring sports a little differently than if you had done it all year. So you those are they're strategies that schools use, but you got to be kind of careful with how you put them out. But we'll be talking about those and other options that are coming along, and we'll see what things have gone our way. There are a few. One that comes to mind, you've heard how difficult it's been to fill positions.
Yes.
And to find substitutes. So I would expect in those lines there'd be some favorable balances, and as we get closer to the middle of the year, maybe those can be transferred, or I think we'll have a better picture
Okay.
once we get right after Christmas. But it's not too early. It's a point well taken.
John, speaking of not too early, and thanks for getting this started. Can you speak briefly about the reserves, and at what point does this trigger a conversation with the city about reserves, specifically for potential uptick in claims and requests?
Well, I think the first one, if you remember, there are a couple different reserves, but most of them are related to health insurance.
Right.
Maybe half or more. And when we talked to David St. Hilaire, that's exactly what he was saying, is that because of this expectation, they had reserved money just in case. So I think that's the first place we should turn for help, because that's what it's there for. But I think that probably January would be a good time to say it. And, for them to release reserves, they're on their balance sheet, which means it doesn't have any impact on the city surplus. That stays what it is, and whatever gets added to it when the audit's finished. This is in a very different place and would have no impact. So that's a strategy I think we'll look at very early as well. And they also have something for just general. I think it's maybe 500,000. What a perfect place to get your fuel budget overage from, because the general thinking is fuel prices will come down. So I think taking from the reserve wouldn't lead to any spike, or really wouldn't impact how we budget for next year. So we'll dust off his memo, I think, very quickly.
Thank you, John.
Yep. So also in the report this month, we've been promising you, and finally we have it, summary of our grants. And I think it's on the last page. We thought, we talked about this, but we said, why don't we just in the report show all the grants, even though some are the same, some are small and don't have a lot of impact. And clearly the coronavirus relief grants are the name of the game this year, but we said, for the report, let's just put them all out. We can talk about how we want to do our reporting going on, but we just felt that was the way to go. And the list, I'm not real familiar with what you were getting in the past, but I can say that it's noteworthy. It has to be noteworthy. The big grants that we have, the virus relief grants, and you'll see them right there. If you look down, we use an internal number to keep track of things, but grant 29, about 8 or 10 rows down, is the ESER 2. And you can see that's close to $6 million. So that's in there. As we do have some accounting record keeping we have to do with that grant. And if you look down at grant 37, the ESER 3 grant, because we didn't have those grants entirely approved and in place when the school year began, and certainly when we had to start getting people ready. So some of the new people and some of the people that were earmarked into those grants in June, right now they're either in a different grant or the general fund. because we just had to get them into the process and get them going. But what our software does is, and we're in the process of doing that, is we know the people that belong in the new grants, again, from the plan we adopted. And the new software is pretty good with that. You can just simply locate the person in the system, give them the new code where they belong, and not only does it code them going forward, but it brings all their history with them. So it's a pretty easy process. It restates what you've done. So I think it'll look much different to you next month, meaning more of a share, a more normal share of the grant will have been expended, because those big grants are primarily for staff, as you remember, whether it's the Brookfield kindergarten or some of the extra teachers at the high school and those things. They're predominantly staff, so you'll see some changes there. But those, two grants, here's $13 or $14 million right there. You'll see the CARES Act grant on there. That's almost another $1 million. So right away, our total grants are up to $52 million. Typically, they've been, at least the last few years, even with when the Alliance was lower, they were in the $40 million range or below. So you see that effect there. You also see the Alliance grant at a higher level. I think we talked about that at the board meeting. It's gone from 14 million up to 17 million. And if we have our way, it's going more higher than that next year. And we're working on making that happen. So those are the grants. And although that's the end of the first page in the report, I'd also like to speak about transportation before we leave the reports. But questions on grants?
I have a quick question, please. I'm just looking at some of these line items, John, and maybe I'm missing something, but we're running a negative balance on grants.
Right.
How is that possible?
Those would be people that were put into the wrong grants. When we knew people were grant funded and we didn't have the grant quite approved, probably the most famous one is our Title I grant. They approve that every year in November, and we've had it forever. We have teachers that have been on it forever, and come September, they have to be paid. Well, what the software does is when the way we've programmed it, before a teacher gets their first check and we're loading them in, we encumber their salaries. It's not a purchase order, but if a teacher is earning $50,000 and we get ready to pay them, you'll see an encumbrance out there. So what you're seeing here in the grants that are overspent is because people are in the wrong spots and we've taken their whole salary. You kind of get used to it with the state's way they approve things kind of late, particularly some of what we call the entitlement grants. You know how much you're going to get. You're asking for the same thing, and but it's time to start school. So you have
to wait until the grant actually comes through to catch up with it.
And it's easier for us to get them in the right fund. If they're in the grant fund or in the school lunch fund or wherever they belong, it's much easier to correct them later than if you're trying to go between funds. When you do that, there's more journal entries, and sometimes you got to write checks. And it's
John, thank you for clarifying that point. And Kate, I just want to also mention, so as an example, because John, he used a really good example talking about the title grant, but all of the title grants, actually, they're not even open until school starts. So that's Title 1, 2, 3, and 4 as an example. They're not open until school starts, and we do have salaries coming out of those grants, in addition to supplies that are typically ordered. And then to John's point, then they do their shuffle in the finance department and start moving folks back to the appropriate areas where they belong. I just
okay.
that part.
Yeah, that helps.
Kate, I'd like to add, Kate, if I could, to that. I don't want it to seem like that's the only thing going on. It was quite a startup this year, getting everybody hired through the hiring process. It includes fingerprints and background checks and all that. I mean, you've heard of the number of new people that were hired, and just the vacancies, trying to fill them. So it was a strain on the payroll department to get people paid and get them paid the right amount. And there were times where we said, even if we don't know the accounting, we'll do that later. Let's get them in the classroom in front of the kids, and we'll sort it out later. So it wasn't the kind of startup I think we've had before. It's certainly not what we're going to continue with, but there's some effects of that when I look at it, I see. So full disclosure.
I do want to just look at line grant number 135, which is Education Jobs Fund. It's a $20,000 grant that's listed there. And if you move over to the sum of year-to-date transactions, you've got $21,034.08. So we're only a little bit over, which is the 1,034. But I can't imagine. Maybe I'm missing something. It just doesn't make sense to me how that would be a salary-based issue there.
Kate, I'm sorry, which line item was it again?
135, the Education Jobs Fund.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to look into that. It won't be hard to answer. I can email people tomorrow.
It's not a lot of money. I think, it's more a concern about, how do we make sure, for us to look at this when we've been looking at these budgets, your explanations certainly help round out how we understand it. But, if there are discrepancies that are happening beyond that, I don't want to, we're 3 months into the school year almost already. And, we need to get these things ironed out because we're going into budget season. We need to be able to prepare that with a clear perspective of what's happening, what money is coming in and what money is going out of the district and what money we've set aside to do certain things. So, I can certainly appreciate the task before you is substantial, but I do want to just make sure that we tidy that up because those are questions I have even as a taxpayer in the city. So,
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Transportation. Okay. So we were asked. I don't know. Was it the board meeting itself or the?
It was the finance meeting.
Yeah.
John, it was our last finance meeting, and it was a question number one about is our contract with STA ending soon? And I had informed the committee that we had actually just extended our contract with STA. However, it did come at a savings, and so I thought it would be appropriate at this meeting since this is where the question was asked, if we can just kind of review those savings and kind of the details of the contract.
And I when I looked at it closely, I'm not sure they were paying it. I shouldn't say this on film, but I'm not sure they were paying as close attention as they could because I'll explain in a second. So last spring, the STA contract had one more year to run. It would have been this year. I suspect that was the fifth year of a 5-year. And as is pretty typical of school bus companies, rather than face a competitive bid situation where they have all this investment of vehicles and capital and people, they hate to lose that if they can avoid it. So it's almost common that towards the end of their contracts, they'll come in and make an offer to extend. And that's what happened. But their offer was kind of typical too. They said, instead of going into our 5th year with a 3.5% price increase, let's rip up the contract and let's start a new one. And we'll give you what they call a 0% increase. We'll hold the prices flat for a year. And it's always pretty attractive to school boards, especially when they're facing a tough budget, and this is one of their biggest line items. So we did that. And then there was a 3.5% escalator put on the remaining years, which is not far from inflation really. So here's a pretty good deal for
I'm
us.
going to share it now, John. The computer's slow, but I'm going to share it now, the letter.
Okay. But here's even a little percent like that on a big contract with us. Yeah, this is and it's normal when these contracts get changed. It's done in a letter format, both sides sign, and away you go. So, but the 0% increase, our price per bus per day is $386. Sounds like a lot. But if we had put a 3.5% increase on that instead of the 0, that would have been $13 per bus per day. Doesn't sound like much, but we have 119 buses. Kevin, if you can show the other page, and we run them for 180 days. So when you do that math out, it's close to $285,000 that it's a cost we avoided in the current year budget. But my comment about maybe they weren't looking as closely as everyone thought is, that holds down the base. So that 280,000 goes through the life of the contract. They never get that back. I mean, it's hard. I'm sure when we're selling our budget and the 3.5% increase, it's like anything. It's probably like, when you hold your teacher contract down for a year, people forget pretty quickly. But that's a lot of money to get each year. The other thing.
It's not a lot. I'll share the next page.
Okay. We can send that around
Okay.
tomorrow too. The other thing they did, there were 10 new buses that we budgeted for the primary center. And what they said was in the letter that they would not increase the prices of those for the life of the 4 or 5 years. You can see it right there near Kevin's cursor. There, the addition of 10 program will remain at the current price for the duration of the contract. So that was pretty good. And then finally, and I don't know the background of this, but they have agreed to, they pay for they hire the bus monitors that we have on mostly our special ed buses, our smaller buses, and they pass that back to us. But what they said was they would, for the Danbury Primary Center, they would pay the cost of the monitors for the year. It's 8 people, 8 or 10 making, let's say they make, I don't know, $20,000 each. That's money too that we don't have to spend. So I wish I had had these specifics when we were asked, what did we save? It took a little while to dig them out, but when we did, it looked like a good deal for us. So I thought it was important to bring that back tonight.
Thank you, John. I'm the one who raised the question the last time.
Oh, okay.
And I appreciate your deep dive to give me a very legitimate answer, sir.
Yeah, I just didn't know it when you mentioned. I knew we saved money, but I didn't know how.
John, when we're factoring in these costs for the buses and the fuel, or I'm not sure if the contract is structured in a way that we're paying them, a certain amount per gallon of fuel or whatever, or if it's a flat amount that they start us with.
We pay for the fuel.
We pay independently for that fuel.
Yep.
So what line item does that appear under? Is it under the propane?
The one I pointed out under the heating oil. I think it's 2 below that. It says propane fuel. All of the buses are propane powered.
Right.
And, yeah, so we buy it in combination with the city. They bid it out, and we pay the price. We take
And
economies of scale.
We've allotted $308,000 for that, right? So
Yep.
I'm assuming that next column, which is reflecting a zero, we have to have used fuel by now, right? Because we've been running school for 2.5 months. So
There's
how does
a
that?
the tank. They have a gigantic tank over there, and they've been using what's in the tank, which we purchased last year, or whenever the tank went in. It's funny you should mention that, because my email in the last couple hours from Beverly in Accounts Payable, she was saying there's a purchase order for me to approve for propane.
There you go.
I think we've run out, or we're about to.
Okay. And so I guess then my other question would be about, the buses and the STA contract. I would assume that that shows up on a line item as well.
It does.
And
Yep.
I would have thought it would have appeared under pupil transportation, which is 55010.
Right.
But to date, we've only spent $421.50 according to this line item. So,
very briefly, this may be more information than you want to know. We got what we thought was our first bill just the other day. And with our new transportation coordinator, we're going over it today. And I noticed it was for November. They bill at the beginning of the month, which is another problem. But I said to Kelly, hey, we haven't had September and October. When you're over at the terminal today, why don't you ask them, did they send it or what happened? So she came back, and, STA was recently sold, and, they've done certain things. They're good, still a good company, but they do things differently. And what we learned was the person who does the billing in early September went on a paternity leave for a month and didn't come back. We're supposed to, so they had someone else, a woman who was brought in, was supposed to do the October bill, and she said she moved to Florida. So they haven't billed us.
We haven't been invoiced, right?
Yeah.
John and I were just talking about this.
So I mean, obviously that presents an obstacle on our end, because we're sitting here trying to figure out how we're going to squeeze all the
we
money
will
out
get
of it.
we will get the invoices though, and we budgeted in those areas.
And we can encumber an estimate. We know how many buses we're running, what they cost per day. These bills look pretty similar month in, month out. So
Okay. So can you then talk, and I apologize, I just need a little bit of clarification, because this information looks different to me and I know we had it last month as well, and I sort of was like, not fully digesting everything. But now in looking at this October report, we've got the budget column, and then we have the expenditure column, the encumbrance column, and then the unencumbered balance.
Right.
Can you just help me understand, and forgive me, because I'm just not a finance person, so I just need a little help understanding that, because I'm looking at like the pupil transportation, for example, and we've got a budgeted amount of, $5 million. And of that, almost 3.5 is unencumbered.
right. And there's also more in the next page. The special ed transportation is a separate line item. That's because the state of Connecticut wants it that way at the end of the year. It's a different reporting. But of course, the budget is what it says, in the expenditures. Those are checks that we've written. Government accounting is cash basis accounting rather than accrual base. You show your expenditures in the month that you incur them, you don't accrue them and reverse it the next month. I don't know why it's that way, but our expenditures are not accrued. They're actual checks that were written. And then so the third column, the encumbrances, I like to tell people those are purchase orders. that we've issued that we haven't paid. So what we try to do with the encumbrances is show that not only, let's say we have a budget of whatever, we've spent some of that budget, but we've obligated some more of it. And so we subtract from those two columns from what we've budgeted. First column, what we spend, second column, what we're obligated to spend later. And then what's left over is the last one. We call it the unencumbered balances. I don't know where they came up with that name either.
That's cumbersome.
Yeah. And so, but what makes it a little different is that column of encumbrances isn't just purchase orders. Because we're such a personal services business, and most of our budget is salaries, we put aside, when we hire someone, we set their whole salary for the school year as an obligation so that we know, do we have anything left or are we over? Because particularly with the teaching lines, we'll do our budget and maybe we'll know people are retiring or not coming back, but it may not be until the summer that we find out what step we're going to put people on. So there could be some differences there when you finally do your hiring. So
Okay.
That's the 4 columns.
And then I just have one more question. I promise I'll cede the floor. I want to get a sense, like, for the encumbrances that you're talking about, the POs that you're talking about. Obviously, if you have a salary, right, that just goes the way it does. If we're working with a vendor like STA, for example, and we know, like, we've signed a contract and this is we're spending X number of dollars this school year with them, is that taken into consideration in the encumbrance, or is it like a monthly thing? I'm not clear on that piece.
Yeah. What I like to do, and you'll see this next year, and you'll see it as the year goes on, is once our budget's approved, we're allowed to obligate it. We don't have to wait till July 1 once everything's in place. And you can't wait till July because you won't have your stuff in the classrooms if you wait till July. So what I try and do is for the things that we know we're going to have every year, like transportation. I'll use your example. We'll prepare a single purchase order for probably the entire budget amount, if we still think that's a good estimate. And then each month, we'll reduce that by probably 1/12 or 1/10, whatever it is. As we write the checks, we reduce the encumbrance by the same amount as it goes down. Now, maybe we'll find, like in the case of fuel, our budget really should have been a little different. We might even change that encumbrance because what the point we try and make as we turn the year into January is we want good data as we set the next set of budgets. So it's important to keep that up. But we also, and you'll start to see in my reports, we're going to try and predict what's going to be left in June if nothing changes. Like the 2.8 million we had returned this year, yes, it was for health insurance. You probably could have seen some of that coming. And what I'd like to do with both the cabinet and the board is saying, if nothing else changes, our unencumbered balance on June 30th will be $400,000, say. And then you as a board can decide with the authority in your operating budget, do you want to just let that go? There could be reasons for it, or is there some need that has come up? Maybe something you had to cut in the following year's budget. You say, hey, let's pre-buy it now since we had, so I'll be trying to give you their forecasts of what's left. And by encumbering as much as I can and encumbering more than we have now, that's our way that we do it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just seems like that unencumbered column, certainly if you look at the end of the report, we've got, almost $29 million unencumbered.
Yep.
So
if I had been here, I shouldn't say it that way. Next year in July and August, that's when we'll put our encumbrances on, and it has been a difficult start. We've had a lot of turnover in the finance office, and we have our head above water now, and we're swimming.
You're wading
so
to the
I think
shore.
you'll see some of these things come on in time to make those forecasts for June 30th.
Excuse me, John,
Thanks,
the
John.
school lunch program, is that included in other purchase services? And do we have a breakdown of that budget?
We don't. It's a separate fund. What you're looking at here is you're looking at two funds, the general fund and I'll call it the grant fund. The school lunch fund is not in tonight's report. I think it because it's what you might call an enterprise fund, meaning it lives with its receipts. It's self-funding, so they really don't set that budget ahead of time. They have to break even, so it's not reported the same way. I don't know if I'm explaining it, but
I get the direction you're going to, because money comes in also from a certain amount of students.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right, and what we can do though, particularly given where we were at the end of the year last year, with the lack of revenue come in and the situation that it put us in, there's no reason why we couldn't give an update. I don't think it's necessary to really give a monthly update, but maybe quarterly or kind of biannual update at the very least, because as long as the school year is normal, I don't think we're going to have any issues with the type of deficit that we had in the last 2 years. And I mean, I think if we can show that this year, I think the board will be reasonably pleased that, we're not going to have, deficits moving forward. And I don't think we're going to have any issues as long as we have regular school. We're certainly on our way right now.
Thank you.
That's certainly something we can share, January, February, and we'll have a pretty good look of what our projections look like for the rest of the year.
Yep, so that's kind of the long and the short of the report. Other questions?
Has the audit been, is that finished?
No, we're having a meeting tomorrow morning. What's happened with audits, they're going through a change too, the profession. I saw something this weekend, chairman of Price Waterhouse, that's one of the biggest firms, announced that all of their auditors could work remotely if they wanted to. I thought was kind of startling, because what we're seeing is our auditors are working remotely more and more. They're not here as much as I think they should be, but it's harder to do. When they're on site, they're with you, for days, and they say, "Hey, can I see this?" And you hand them a binder, or
Exactly.
"Hey, I'd like to know this." So you answer all the questions quickly. It goes much faster. Here, they've asked for same things several times. They want them scanned, dropped into a portal, and we don't have the give and take to talk to them, and so it's slower. It's probably a sign of the way things are going to be, but it shouldn't be taking this long. I think it took a long time last year, from what David St. Hilaire tells me, but I had expected it to be faster this year. So.
Hey, John, just to piggyback, Kathy, as John mentioned, the auditors did come in and they were here for literally less than a week. And we were under the impression we gave what we needed. Frank uploaded a great deal of amount of stuff prior to us arriving. I've uploaded a bunch of stuff, John has. We are meeting with them tomorrow, virtually, of course. just to iron out anything that's left over. But it is taking a lot longer. We were hoping to be done by now, November that we're walking into, but it seems to be like, as John mentioned, having the auditor present in the building and kind of, stopping us and, having us there for, 6 to 8 to 20 hours and just pulling reports as much as we can for what they need, has kind of extended this audit a little longer.
I can't even imagine doing it virtually. It must be a nightmare. And well, whatever. I just hope it works well. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm good. We done? Mr. Russo?
I am done. Thank you. If there are no other further questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second that.
Thank
Motion
you.
made by Kathy, seconded by Kate. Good night, everyone.